The satisfyingly heavy thud of the car door closing behind me was the final note in the symphony of a perfect day. I had just disemboweled a hostile witness on the stand, leading to a swift and decisive victory for my client, a major tech firm. The judge's compliment was still ringing in my ears as I walked up the manicured path to our brownstone. The crisp New York air was like a tonic. This was my sanctuary, the place I'd poured my soul and a significant portion of my earnings into. Everything was precisely as it should be. I turned the key in the lock, expecting the usual quiet hum of the house, the soft glow of the lights we'd programmed to welcome us home. Instead, I was met with a tense silence that felt heavier than silence had a right to be. "David, I'm home," I called out, dropping my briefcase by the console table. "In here, Liz." His voice came from the living room, a little too high, a little too quick. I found him standing by the fireplace, not reading, not drinking, just standing. He looked like a man waiting for a root canal. His smile was a strained, twitchy thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, honey, big day?" he asked, coming over to give me a peck on the cheek. It was perfunctory, huge. "We crushed them." Sterling himself called to congratulate me, I said, studying him. He was fidgeting, a sure sign something was wrong. "What's going on, David? You've got that—" I accidentally ran over the neighbor's prize poodle. He forced a chuckle that died in his throat. "Nothing gets past you. It's just, we need to talk about something." A cold trickle of apprehension started down my spine. "Okay, talk. Did something happen at your job?" David was a good man, kind and decent, but his career as a high school history teacher was never going to afford us this lifestyle. It was a disparity we'd long since navigated, but sometimes it prickled. No, work's fine. It's family." That word, in that tone, instantly put me on guard. My family consisted of a few distant cousins I exchanged Christmas cards with. His was more complicated. "Your mother? Is she all right?" "Mom's fine. It's Chloe." I blinked. Chloe? The name felt foreign on my tongue. Chloe was the daughter of the woman my father had married late in life. A whirlwind romance after my mother passed. We were never close. She was 10 years younger, perpetually playing the victim, and her life was a masterclass in poor decisions. I'd seen her maybe a dozen times in total. "What about her?" David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure agitation. "She's in a bind, Liz. A real bad one. Chloe is always in a bind. David, what is it this time? Maxed out another credit card? Lost another job waiting tables?" I tried to keep the edge out of my voice, but it was difficult. My patience for Chloe's dramas was less than zero. "It's more serious than that," he said, his voice dropping, taking on that pleading tone I'd come to dread. "She's pregnant." I waited. "And women get pregnant every day. It's generally considered a natural process." "Liz, please, don't be like that. She's due next month." That gave me a slight pause. A month? She must have been heavily showing, and I hadn't heard a thing. "Okay, so she's having a baby. Congratulations to her, and what's his name? Jake? Where does that leave us?" They got evicted from their apartment in Queens. Apparently, Jake lost his job a while back, and they haven't paid rent in 3 months. They have nowhere to go. Liz, nowhere. The cold trickle turned into an ice bath. I could see where this was going, and the sheer audacity of it was taking my breath away. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Chloe, my stepsister whom I barely know, and her deadbeat boyfriend, who can't hold down a job, are about to have a baby, and they're homeless, and you're telling me this because—" He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a stubborn kind of resolve. "I told them they could stay here, just for a little while, until they get back on their feet." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to say he was joking, but he just stood there, looking like a guilty child. You did what? The words came out quiet, lethally soft. Honey, try to understand. She's family. She's pregnant. What was I supposed to do? Let her give birth on the street? His voice was rising now, defensiveness replacing the pleading. Family? I spat the word out. She is my father's widow's daughter. That's not family. David, that's a vague acquaintance with a shared, tenuous connection. And since when do you make decisions about who gets to live in my house? Our house. Elizabeth. He shot back, a flash of anger in his eyes. I live here too. Or did you forget? I have not forgotten a single thing. I haven't forgotten that I bought this house before we were married. I haven't forgotten that I pay the mortgage, the property taxes, and the staggering maintenance bills on this, our house. And I certainly haven't forgotten that a major decision, like inviting people to live with you, sis, something you discuss with your partner, you don't just decree it after the fact. There wasn't time to discuss it. He yelled, throwing his hands up. She called me sobbing this morning. They were being locked out today. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, let me check with the boss. Yes, that's exactly what you were supposed to say. I was shouting now. All the triumph of the day evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage. You were supposed to say, that's a difficult situation. Chloe, but I need to speak with my wife. This is my home. David, my private space. You know how I feel about my privacy. You know, I need a place to decompress from the chaos of my work. And you've invited chaos itself to move in, rent-free. It's just for a few weeks, until the baby comes and they can find a place. Have a little compassion. For God's sake, is winning cases all that matters to you? What about basic human decency? The accusation hit its mark, but it only fueled my fury. He was trying to paint me as the villain, the cold, heartless career woman, while he played the noble savior. Don't you dare, I seethed, stepping closer to him. Don't you dare turn this around on me. This is about you making a unilateral decision that affects both of our lives. This is about you violating my trust and the sanctity of our home. This isn't compassion. David, this is being a pushover. You're so desperate to be the good guy that you're willing to sacrifice our peace for it. We were nose to nose now. Years of underlying tensions about money, family, and control bubbling to the surface in a toxic stew. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. I will not apologize for helping family, he said, his voice low and shaking. The decision is made. They're on their way. The finality in his tone was like a physical blow. He wasn't asking. He was telling. He had committed us, committed me, to this nightmare without my consent. I felt a dizzying sense of betrayal. This man, whom I had loved, whom I had built a life with, had just shown me that my feelings, my comfort, my domain, meant less to him than the manufactured crisis of a near stranger. Before I could form another sentence, the doorbell rang. The sound was obscenely cheerful in the tense silence of the room. David's eyes widened in panic. He looked from me to the door and back again. They're here, he whispered, as if I might not have guessed. I didn't move. I just stood there, my arms crossed, my entire body trembling with a rage so pure it was almost calming. I looked at my husband, at the pathetic guilt on his face, and I knew I was defeated. For now, the bell rang again, insistently. Aren't you going to get it? I asked, my voice icy cold. Your guests are waiting. He swallowed hard and walked to the door like a man heading to the gallows. I turned to face the fireplace, my back to the door, needing a moment to compose myself, to lock the fury away behind a mask of cold indifference. I heard the door open. David. Oh, thank God. It was Chloe's voice, pitched high with a theatrical tremor. It was awful. Just awful. Hey, man, thanks for this. Really, that was Jake's voice. A low, grating mumble. I took a deep, steadying breath and turned around. There they were, standing in my foyer, silhouetted against the evening light. Chloe, looking impossibly large and pale, one hand resting dramatically on her swollen belly, the other clutching a overstuffed duffel bag, and Jake, lanky and slouching, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes already scanning the entryway with an appraising, almost possessive gleam. Chloe's eyes met mine, and she offered a weak, watery smile. "Oh, Elizabeth. Hi. I'm so sorry about all this. You're just a lifesaver." I didn't smile back. I just looked at her, then at Jake, then at my husband, who couldn't meet my gaze. The invasion had begun, and in that moment, standing in the heart of my own home, I felt a colder, more calculating emotion begin to crystallize beneath the rage. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had just started a war they didn't know they were in. I forced the corners of my mouth up into something that might, from a distance, be mistaken for a smile. "Don't mention it," I said, my voice flat. "Make yourselves at home." The first 24 hours were masterclass in the slow, meticulous erosion of sanity. My home, a space meticulously calibrated for peace and efficiency, had been transformed into a chaotic, foreign landscape overnight. It wasn't just the physical presence of Chloe and Jake. It was the psychic noise they emitted, a constant, low-frequency hum of entitlement and disregard. I came down the next morning, dressed for another demanding day at the firm, my armor of a tailored suit feeling more necessary than ever. I was greeted by the sight of Jake, slouched on my prized Italian leather sofa in a stained t-shirt and boxers, his bare feet propped up on the reclaimed wood coffee table I'd sourced from a boutique in Brooklyn. "Morning," he grunted, not taking his eyes off the television, where a cacophony of sports highlights blared at an unreasonable volume. "Good morning, Jake," I said, my voice tight, the volume. "Please." He glanced at me, feigning confusion, then pointed the remote and jabbed the button half-heartedly. The sound dropped from deafening to merely intrusive. It was a small act, but a deliberate one. A test. I said nothing, walking past him into the kitchen. The scene there was worse. Chloe was at the center island, her robe hanging open over her nightgown, surrounded by the debris of what looked like a multi-course breakfast. Empty cereal boxes, a jar of peanut butter with a knife stuck in it, and a scattering of crumbs formed a grim tableau. She was humming to herself, scrolling through her phone. "Elizabeth, good morning. I hope we didn't wake you." The little munchkin was craving Fruit Loops at, like, 5 a.m., she said, patting her belly as if it were a separate, commanding entity. "I was working," I replied curtly, moving to the espresso machine. It was my ritual, the hiss and grind a comforting prelude to the day. The machine was cold. The portafilter was grimy with old, wet coffee grounds. "Oops," Chloe said, following my gaze. "That thing is so complicated." Jake tried to figure it out, but gave up. "We just used the drip machine." She gestured to a cheap, plastic contraption I kept for large gatherings, now stained and sitting in a puddle of brown water. I took a slow, deep breath. "Chloe, this is a $3,500 machine. You don't just figure it out. You treat it with care." Her face instantly crumpled into a mask of hurt. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth. We're not used to all this." She waved a hand vaguely at the sleek kitchen. "We're just simple people. We didn't mean to break your fancy coffee thing." Before I could respond, David shuffled in, looking tired and harried. "What's going on?" "Elizabeth's upset about the coffee maker," Chloe said, her voice quivering with manufactured tears. David looked from her piteous expression to my stony face. "Liz, it's just a coffee maker. I'm sure it's fine. I'll clean it later." The dismissal was like a spark on gasoline. "It's not about the coffee maker, David," I snapped, my control fraying. "It's about respect. You don't put a knife in a jar of peanut butter and leave it on the counter. You don't put your dirty feet on furniture that costs more than your car. You clean up after yourself. These are basic, Adult concepts. Whoa, easy there, Jake said, ambling into the kitchen. He went straight to the refrigerator, opened it, and stood there, blocking the door, scanning the contents, just looking for something to eat. You guys got any real food? Like frozen pizzas or something? I stared at him, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Real food is in the vegetable drawer. Jake, the one you're leaning on. He snorted, grabbed a can of soda, and shut the door. Yeah, that's not gonna cut it. I need sustenance. He looked at David. Hey, man, you got $20? I'll run out and grab some actual groceries. David, to my utter horror, started patting his pockets. Sure. Jake, I think No, I said, the word cutting through the air like a whip. Everyone turned to look at me. We're not funding your frozen pizza habit. If you want specific food, you are welcome to go out and buy it with your own money. An ugly silence fell. Chloe started to cry in earnest. Soft, sniffly sobs. See, David, I told you we weren't wanted. We're just a burden. David's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Elizabeth, that was uncalled for. He pulled out his wallet and shoved a 20 at Jake. Here, Jake, get whatever you need. Jake took the money with a smirk, his eyes meeting mine in a flash of triumph. Thanks, man. Knew I could count on you. He sauntered out of the kitchen, leaving the three of us in a toxic triangle. David, a word. Now, in the study, I said, my voice dangerously low. He followed me, his posture defensive. I closed the door. Are you out of your mind? I hissed, keeping my voice down so the unwanted guests wouldn't hear. You're giving him money? Now, after they've been here less than a day and have already trashed the kitchen and disrespected our home? What was I supposed to do? Liz? Let him starve? David shot back, running a hand through his already messy hair. He's a grown man. If he's hungry, he can get a job. That's how it works. And you're enabling this. David, you're making it comfortable for them to stay. This few weeks will turn into months. And you know it. You're being paranoid. They're in a tough spot. A little compassion wouldn't kill you. This isn't compassion. This is being a doormat. Look at them. They've made zero effort. Chloe hasn't mentioned job hunting. Jake hasn't mentioned anything except what's in our fridge. They see you as an easy mark. And you're proving them right. I will not apologize for being a decent human being, he said, his voice rising. This is my house too. And if I want to help my family, I will. The term is enabling. David, and this is my house, legally, financially, in every way that matters. And I will not have it turned into a flop house for your freeloading quasi-relatives. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were a nuclear option. His face went white, then red with a kind of shameful fury I'd never seen before. So that's what this is really about, isn't it? He said, his voice trembling. The great Elizabeth, reminding everyone who holds the purse strings. I'm just the charity case you let live here. Is that it? That is not what I said. And you know it. This is about boundaries and respect, which you have completely trampled. The argument spiraled from there. A rehash of the previous night's battle, but now poisoned by the tangible evidence of the invasion. We were interrupted by a knock on the study door. David? Chloe's voice was small and pathetic from the hallway. I'm not feeling so good. The stress, it's not good for the baby. Maybe you could make me some tea? David shot me a look of pure accusation, as if my perfectly reasonable anger was causing Chloe physical harm. Of course. Chloe, I'll be right there. He brushed past me without another word, leaving me alone in the study. I stood there, shaking, listening to the sounds of my husband comforting the woman who was systematically destroying our home. I heard the kettle being filled, the clatter of a mug, their murmured voices in the kitchen. I was an outsider in my own life. That evening was a study in silent warfare. I ate a salad alone at the island while the three of them ordered greasy Chinese takeout with David's money. No doubt, and spread it out on the living room floor in front of the TV, laughing at some inane movie. My home smelled of soy sauce and defeat. Later, as I got ready for bed, David came into the bedroom. The air between us was frigid. "They're not bad people, Liz," he said, his tone conciliatory but weary. "They're just different from us. They need a little help." I turned from the bathroom mirror, cold cream in my hand. Help is giving someone a referral to a social worker. Help is offering to pay the security deposit on an affordable apartment. Help is not moving them into your bedroom and handing them your wallet. You've confused helping with surrendering. He sighed, a long, suffering sound. "I just want peace. Can we please just have a little peace?" "There's no peace with them here, David," I said, my voice flat and final. "You made sure of that." I climbed into my side of the bed, turning my back to him. He lay down on his side, a canyon of resentment between us. The house, which had always been my refuge, now felt like a gilded cage. The sanctuary had well and truly unraveled. And as I lay there, listening to the faint sound of the television and Jake's grating laugh from downstairs, the cold, hard seed of a plan began to take root in the fertile soil of my anger. If David wanted peace, he would get it, but it would be a piece of my making, on my terms, and it would be absolute. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell, a slow, grinding erosion of my spirit. I started spending longer hours at the office, not because the work required it, but because the alternative was returning to the occupied territory my home had become. The pristine, minimalist spaces were now littered with the detritus of Chloe and Jake's existence. A baby book on prenatal yoga, a discarded video game controller, a constant, faint smell of microwave popcorn that clung to the upholstery. My interactions with David were reduced to terse, functional exchanges. "Did you pay the gas bill?" "The recycling goes out tomorrow." We were roommates, and hostile ones at that. He'd fully embraced his role as the martyred benefactor, tiptoeing around Chloe's ever-shifting moods and trying to find common ground with Jake. A futile endeavor if ever there was one. I was in my office, prepping for a deposition, trying to lose myself in the clean, logical lines of contract law, when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but with a London area code. A flicker of professional curiosity cut through my gloom. I answered, my voice all business. "Elizabeth Holloway." "Elizabeth." "Arthur Sterling." The voice was crisp, authoritative, and unmistakable. Arthur Sterling wasn't just the CEO of Sterling. Thorne Vanderbilt, he was its living legend. A direct call from him was rare and significant. "Mr. Sterling, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "That victory in the Omnicorp case. Nasty business. You handled it with remarkable finesse." The board was impressed. "Thank you, sir. It was a challenging but rewarding case." Rewarding indeed. Which brings me to my reason for calling. We're making a significant strategic pivot in our European operations. The London office needs new leadership, strong leadership. We're not looking for a caretaker. We're looking for a visionary to shake things up, to bring some of that New York aggression and brilliance to the city. I sat up straighter. My deposition, notes forgotten. I see. My mind was racing. London. Chairmanship of the European Division. It was the pinnacle, the kind of position people worked their entire lives for and never got within sniffing distance of. The title would be Senior Managing Partner and Chairman. Europe. Compensation package is, as you'd expect, substantial. A 7-figure base, a performance-based bonus that could triple it, and a long-term incentive plan tied to the division's profitability. The numbers were staggering, even for me, but it was the power, the scope, the sheer scale of the challenge that set my blood on fire. This was the escape hatch, a glorious, triumphant exit from the mess my life had become. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. "Mr. Sterling, I'm very interested." "Good. I'm emailing you the formal offer letter and the contract now." It's standard, for the most part, but I need you to pay particular attention to Section 12, the Residency and Commitment Clause. Residency clause? I asked, my lawyer's mind latching onto the specific terminology. Yes, we've learned from past distractions, he said, and I could almost hear the grimace in his voice. This isn't a 9-to-5 job, Elizabeth. It's a total immersion. We require our senior leadership in these key roles to be fully present, both physically and mentally. The contract stipulates that your primary residence must be the company-provided residence in London. It's a penthouse in Mayfair. Full security, all amenities. You'll want for nothing. That sounds more than adequate, I said, a plan beginning to form in the back of my mind. Wild and audacious. It's non-negotiable. Furthermore, to ensure there are no conflicting loyalties or potential security risks, all your privately held real estate assets, globally, will fall under the management of our corporate property division for the duration of your tenure. They will be maintained, secured, and if you wish, sold or rented out to thoroughly vetted, corporate-approved tenants. The key point is this: the properties must be vacated. No long-term guests, no extended family situations. We need your focus to be absolute. The last thing we need is a key executive dealing with a tenant dispute or a domestic issue back in the States. It's a clean break. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. It was as if the heavens had opened up and delivered a weapon of divine retribution, wrapped in a golden bow. I felt a smile, the first genuine one in weeks, touch my lips. I understand completely, Mr. Sterling. It's a very prudent policy. No distractions. Exactly. Review the documents. Have your lawyer look them over. But I need an answer soon. Elizabeth, this offer is exclusive, and it's not going to be on the table forever. I'll review everything immediately and have an answer for you within 48 hours. Excellent. Talk soon. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling slightly, but not from nerves. From adrenaline. I opened my email and there it was, the offer letter. I scrolled past the eye-watering numbers, past the title, straight to Section 12. I read it once, then twice, savoring every word. The employee agrees to take up primary residence at the company-designated property. All other residential properties owned wholly or in part by the employee shall be transferred to the management purview of STV Property Management. Said properties shall be vacated of all occupants prior to management transfer. No tenancy or occupancy agreements, formal or informal, shall be permitted without the express written consent of STV Property Management, which consent may be withheld at the company's sole discretion. It was ironclad. It was perfect. It was my ticket out and their eviction notice, all in one beautifully legal package. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of suppressed euphoria. I drove home, but for the first time, the dread was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating anticipation. I walked into the usual scene. Jake on the couch, Chloe chattering at David in the kitchen. David looked up as I entered, his expression guarded. "Hey," he said, "you're home late. Big things are happening at the firm." I said, my voice light, almost cheerful. I hung up my coat with deliberate care. "Oh yeah?" David asked, curiosity cutting through his usual defensive posture. "Maybe. Still early days," I said, being deliberately vague. I needed to set the stage. I went to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of Pellegrino. Tough market right now. Lots of restructuring talk. Nasty business. I sighed. A convincing performance of professional worry. David's face fell. Restructuring? Does that mean layoffs? I took a long sip of water, letting the anxiety hang in the air for a moment. It's a possibility. My position, let's just say it's not as secure as it once was. The pressure is on from the top. Sterling himself is cracking the whip. It wasn't a complete lie, just a strategic misdirection. David looked genuinely concerned. For himself. For our lifestyle. Jesus. Liz. Is it that bad? I'm handling it, I said, with a brave smile that didn't reach my eyes. But we might need to tighten our belts. Be prepared for some changes. I saw the panic flash across his face. He looked from me to Chloe, who was listening with wide, worried eyes. The provider fantasy he'd been living was suddenly threatened. Don't worry, David. Chloe piped up, her voice syrupy with false sympathy. I'm sure Elizabeth is just being modest. She's a superstar. They'd never let her go. But her eyes were calculating, already assessing the stability of her new free ride. I just gave a non-committal shrug and walked upstairs, leaving them to stew in the uncertainty I had just created. The stage was set. Let them get comfortable with the idea of instability. Let David sweat a little about the bills he was so casually handing over to Jake. I closed the door to my home office and opened the contract on my laptop again. I scrolled to the signature page. All I had to do was sign. My digital signature would be the first domino, setting off a chain of events that would end with Chloe and Jake on the curb and David groveling at my feet. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, mysterious smile spreading across my face. It was no longer a smile of desperation, but one of pure, unadulterated power. They thought they had invaded my home. They had no idea they were living on borrowed time, in a house that was about to be repossessed by a far higher authority. The game had just changed, and I was about to become the undisputed champion. The charade began in earnest the next day. I became an actress in my own life, and my performance was worthy of an Academy Award. The confident, sharp-edged Elizabeth Holloway was carefully packed away, replaced by a quieter, more vulnerable version of myself. I let the strain show. I started coming home from the office, looking genuinely weary, not just irritated. I'd sigh heavily while reviewing household bills on my tablet, a subtle but deliberate shift from my usual efficient scrutiny. A few nights after the restructuring conversation, I orchestrated the first major scene. I was in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator as if the answers to my problems were hidden behind the kale. David came in, drawn by my uncharacteristic stillness. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice cautious. I closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, rubbing my temples. "I don't know, David. The pressure at work is intense. There's talk of merging entire departments. People are getting nervous." I let my voice trail off, heavy with implication. He took the bait, his face etched with real concern now. "Your department? Are you on the list?" "I'm a high-value target, which means I'm also a high-cost target," I said, turning to face him, letting him see the feigned anxiety in my eyes. "If they're looking to cut fat, my salary could fund 3 junior associates. Sterling is all about the bottom line right now. It's brutal." David ran a hand over his face. "What can I do? Maybe I should look for a second job. Tutoring pays well." The offer was pathetic, but perfect for my narrative. "Oh, David, that's sweet," I said, reaching out and touching his arm, a gesture that felt foreign but necessary. "But your teaching is your calling. I wouldn't ask you to do that. It's just a lot of pressure." I let my shoulders slump. "I just need to figure it out." I saw the guilt flash in his eyes. Guilt for his inability to contribute equally. Guilt for the financial strain Chloe and Jake were undoubtedly causing. He pulled me into a hesitant hug. "We'll get through this, Liz. We always do." I rested my head on his shoulder, my face a cold mask he couldn't see. "We," I thought. "There is no we in this. There's just you, and the consequences of your actions." The deception had an immediate effect on the household dynamics. David became more anxious, more eager to please me, while simultaneously trying to rein in Chloe and Jake's spending. It was a futile effort. A few days later, I walked into the living room to find Jake holding a new, expensive-looking gaming headset. "Hey, Liz, check it out," he said, grinning. "Early birthday present to myself. The audio on this thing is insane." I forced a tight smile. "That's great. Jake, Did you find a new job so quickly? I asked, my tone dripping with false innocence. His grin faltered. Nah, not yet. The job market's tight. But a man's gotta have some entertainment, right? David fronted me a little cash until my first check comes in. I simply nodded and walked away, saying nothing, but the seed was planted. Later that evening, I cornered David as he was loading the dishwasher. Jake's new headset, I said quietly. That was a $300 piece of equipment. David, where did he get the money? David wouldn't meet my eyes. I lent it to him. He's been down. Liz, he's trying. I told him it was a loan, to be paid back as soon as he gets a job. A loan he has no means to repay. I stated flatly, we're talking about my potential layoff, and you're funding his video game addiction. Do you see the disconnect here? He's family. David whispered fiercely. What am I supposed to do? He was depressed. Family doesn't exploit family. David, they're taking advantage of you, and you're so desperate to be the hero that you can't see it. I let the hurt and disappointment show on my face. I feel like I'm fighting this battle alone. I'm trying to keep a roof over our heads, and you're handing out cash to a man who can't even be bothered to look for work. I turned and walked away, leaving him with the sting of my words. The beauty of the plan was its vicious symmetry. The more David enabled them, the more ammunition he gave me, and the more justified my ultimate solution would appear. The next weekend, the conflict escalated. Chloe was on the couch, complaining loudly about back pain. I just wish I had one of those fancy pregnancy massage chairs, she moaned, or at least a better recliner. This sofa is killing my spine. Jake, ever the opportunist, looked at David. You hear that? Man, she's carrying your niece or nephew in there. She deserves a little comfort. David looked trapped. Chloe, I'm sorry, but a massage chair is out of the question right now. Of course. Chloe interrupted, her voice trembling. I'm sorry for being a burden. I'll just suffer in silence. She began to cry, the tears arriving on cue. I chose that moment to walk through the room, car keys in hand, heading to the office. I said tonelessly, lots to do if I want to keep my job. The contrast was exquisite. Me, the stoic breadwinner heading out to save us all, while the pregnant princess and her layabout boyfriend demanded luxury items. I saw the conflict raging on David's face. He was starting to see the cracks, but his pride and his misguided sense of duty kept him from admitting it. That night, I made a point of working late in my home office. I left the contract for the London position open on my computer screen. I didn't sign it. Not yet. I wanted the temptation, the possibility, to be visible. I made sure David saw it when he brought me a cup of tea, a peace offering. What's this? He asked, his eyes scanning the header. Sterling, Thorne Vanderbilt, London? I minimized the window quickly, a little too quickly. It's nothing, just a speculative offer, probably a long shot. I offered him a weary smile. Don't worry about it. But of course, he would worry. He would latch onto it as a potential lifeline. The hook was set. The calculated deception was working perfectly. They were getting comfortable in their roles. Chloe, the perpetual victim, Jake. The entitled mooch, David. The beleaguered peacekeeper. And me? I was the long-suffering pragmatist, secretly holding the keys to everyone's fate in my hands. The stage was almost set for the final, devastating act. The air in the penthouse conference room of Sterling, Thorne Vanderbilt's New York headquarters, was cool and smelled of money and old leather. I sat across the expansive mahogany table from Arthur, Sterling himself, the formal offer letter and the hefty contract lying between us like a declaration of war. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Glinting off the silver pen, he pushed toward me. It's all there. Elizabeth, Sterling said, his voice a low rumble. The compensation package, the signing bonus, the complete authority over the European division. We're giving you the keys to the kingdom. All we ask for in return is your absolute and undivided focus. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, solid, a tool of immense power. My heart wasn't racing with nerves. It was beating a steady, determined rhythm. This was no longer a choice. It was an execution, the residency clause. I said, tapping the relevant section with the tip of the pen. I needed to hear him say it one more time. I needed it to be absolutely, legally, unassailably clear, just so we're perfectly aligned. My primary residence must be the company property in London, and my other properties, specifically my brownstone here in New York, will fall under the management of your corporate division. Vacated. Sterling nodded. A sharp, decisive gesture. Precisely. Non-negotiable. We've had senior executives in the past whose effectiveness was compromised by domestic distractions, a tenant dispute in the Hamptons, a problematic relative refusing to leave a condo in Miami. It becomes a time suck, a liability. This clause ensures that when you are in London, your mind is 100% on London. The management team will handle everything. They'll secure the property, arrange for maintenance, and if you wish, find a suitable corporate tenant. But the property must be empty upon transfer. No exceptions. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. We're not just buying your time, Elizabeth. We're buying your peace of mind. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the first real smile I'd felt in months. That sounds like a bargain. Mr. Sterling, a clean break is exactly what I need. I flipped to the final page. There was no hesitation. I signed my name with a firm, flowing script, Elizabeth Holloway. The ink was dark and permanent. It was done. The moment the pen left the paper, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The anxiety, the rage, the feeling of being a prisoner in my own life, it all evaporated. I was now the warden, and I held the release forms. Welcome aboard, Elizabeth, Sterling said, standing and extending his hand. Officially, the board will be thrilled. We'll need you in London in 4 weeks to transition. I'll be ready, I said, shaking his hand firmly. My future was secure. Now, it was time to deal with the past. I drove home that evening with a sense of purpose that bordered on euphoria. I walked into the brownstone, and the usual assault on my senses, the blaring TV, the smell of cheap food, barely registered. David was in the living room, trying to mediate an argument between Chloe and Jake about what to order for dinner. He looked exhausted. Elizabeth, he said, his eyes lighting up with a flicker of hope when he saw me. How was your day? Any news from the firm? I placed my briefcase down carefully and turned to face them all. Chloe was pouting on the sofa. Jake was slouched in an armchair, and David stood between them like a frayed rope in a tug of war. Actually, yes, I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through their bickering. We need to talk. All of us. The change in my tone immediately got their attention. Even Jake muted the television. What is it? David asked, his face pale. I received a formal offer today. A promotion. I let the word hang in the air. David's face broke into a relieved smile. A promotion. That's fantastic news. I knew it. I knew they wouldn't let you go. See, he said, turning to Chloe and Jake. I told you everything would be fine. It's in London. I continued, my voice still even. Senior managing partner and chairman of the European division. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. The smile froze on David's face. London? As in England? That's the one, I said with a slight smile. But what about us? What about the house? He stammered, confusion warring with dawning horror. That's the best part, I said, my tone becoming businesslike. The package includes a full relocation and a company-owned residence in Mayfair. Chloe sat up straighter, her hand going to her belly. Mayfair? Like in the movies? Oh my God, that's so exciting. We've always wanted to see London. I looked at her, my expression neutral. The we in this situation is myself and David. This is a spousal relocation. The room went utterly silent. Jake was the first to break it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. So what are you saying? You're just gonna leave? I turned my gaze to David. The contract has a very specific clause. David, a residency clause. I am required to live in the company-provided residence. And this house, I said, gesturing around us, will be turned over to the company's property management division. They have strict rules. It must be vacated. No long-term guests. The clause is explicitly clear on that point. The color drained completely from David's face. He looked like I'd just punched him in the gut. Vacated? Elizabeth, what are you talking about? Chloe is due in less than a month. They have nowhere to go. I understand that creates a complication, I said, my voice cool and legalistic. But the contract is signed. It's legally binding. The corporate management team will be here in 4 weeks to take possession. They won't allow occupants. It's a liability issue. Chloe let out a sharp, gasping sob. You're kicking us out? You're throwing a pregnant woman out on the street? She turned to David, her face a mask of theatrical betrayal. David, you promised. You said we were safe here. Elizabeth, you can't be serious. David cried, stepping toward me. We can talk to them. Explain the situation. Surely they'll make an exception for family. I already asked. I lied smoothly. They were adamant. No exceptions. Sterling himself said the clause is non-negotiable. They've had problems with domestic distractions in the past. I let the phrase hang in the air, watching as the full weight of it crushed him. My hands are tied. The mask of the weary, pressured employee was gone. The vulnerable woman was gone. Standing before them was the real Elizabeth Holloway, a senior partner at a top law firm, who had just outmaneuvered them all with a single, flawless stroke. I had signed their eviction notice, and I had done it with a smile. The war was over. I had won. The calm I had felt after signing the contract lasted precisely until I walked out of the living room, leaving behind a tableau of shock and incipient chaos. The silence that followed my announcement was more deafening than any argument. It was the silence of a bomb blast. The moment after the explosion before the screams begin, I went upstairs, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the sudden hush. I didn't need to hear the aftermath to know what was happening. I could picture it with perfect, brutal clarity. The dam broke about 10 minutes later. My bedroom door flew open without a knock. David stood there, his face a twisted mask of fury and disbelief. You can't do this, he roared, the sound raw and ragged. You signed a contract? Without talking to me, without even discussing it with me? I was sitting at my dressing table, calmly removing my earrings. I met his eyes in the mirror. Discuss what, David? The career opportunity of a lifetime? The one that secures our financial future? You seemed quite happy to discuss my potential layoff. Why is a promotion suddenly a problem? Don't you dare twist this, he shouted, storming further into the room. This isn't about the promotion, and you know it. This is about them. He jabbed a finger toward the door. You're using this job as a weapon to get rid of Chloe and Jake. I turned on the stool to face him, my expression icy. The clause was in the contract. David, it's standard for this level of position. I didn't write it. I simply agreed to it. Bullshit, he exploded. You could have negotiated. You're a goddamn lawyer. You could have told them about our unique situation. Our situation. I stood up, my own anger finally rising to meet his. What situation is that, David? The situation where you moved 2 people into my home without my consent? The situation where you've been funding their lazy, entitled existence with my money? That situation. Should I have told Arthur Sterling that my husband has turned our marriage home into a halfway house for his freeloading quasi-family? And could he please make an exception to his multi-million-dollar corporate policy to accommodate that? He flinched as if I'd struck him. They need our help. How can you be so cold? So calculating? Calculating? I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You want to see calculating? Calculating is getting pregnant and having no plan. Calculating is losing your job and not looking for a new one. Calculating is manipulating a soft-hearted man into supporting you by crying about being family. I'm not calculating, David. I'm surviving. I'm reclaiming the life you so carelessly gave away. His fists were clenched at his sides. So that's it? You're just going to run off to London and leave me to clean up your mess? My mess? My voice dropped to a deadly whisper. You made this mess the moment you said they could move in. You own this, David. Every last bit of it. I'm not running away. I'm accepting a promotion. You can come to London with me as my husband, or you can stay here and figure out what to do with your family. The choice is yours. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the wounded pride, the terrifying realization that he was utterly powerless, the crumbling of his entire good guy facade. He had no good options, and he knew it. You're a piece of work. Elizabeth, he said, his voice shaking with venom. I never thought you could be this cruel. Before I could respond, a wail echoed from the hallway. Chloe stood there, supported by a scowling Jake. Her face was blotchy and tear-streaked. I heard everything, she sobbed. You're really throwing us out. My baby is going to be homeless because of you. David rushed to her side. Chloe, it's okay. We'll figure something out. Figure what out? David? Jake snarled. Stepping forward, he pointed a finger at me. She's the one who needs to figure it out. This is her house. Her problem. We're not going anywhere. I crossed my arms. The corporate lawyers and the property management team will have a very different opinion. Jake, they deal with squatters all the time. They have a very efficient process for removal. His face darkened with a threatening rage. Are you threatening us? You think you can just have us thrown out on the street? I'm not threatening anyone, I said calmly. I'm explaining the legal and contractual reality. The house will be vacated in 4 weeks. What you do between now and then is your concern, not mine. Chloe's sobs intensified, becoming great, heaving gasps. The stress. I can't. I'm feeling faint. David, the baby. She slumped dramatically against the doorframe. David shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Look what you've done. Are you happy now? If something happens to that baby, it's on you. He put his arm around Chloe and led her away, murmuring reassurances. Jake lingered for a moment, his eyes boring into me with a promise of future trouble. You're gonna regret this, he muttered. I highly doubt that. I replied, turning my back on him to look out the window at the city lights. The storm was here, but I was no longer afraid of the thunder. I had built an ark, and I held the only ticket on board. Let the rain fall. I was already dry. The 4 weeks passed with the agonizing slowness of a glacier and the terrifying speed of a falling guillotine. The house became a war zone of cold silences and simmering resentment. I proceeded with my life with a detached, methodical efficiency that seemed to infuriate David more than any argument. I packed my personal belongings, shipping the majority to London, leaving behind only the stark, impersonal furniture that had come with the house. Each empty closet, each bare surface, was a silent testament to their impending eviction. David ricocheted between desperate attempts to change my mind and futile efforts to find a solution for Chloe and Jake. He tried to play on my sympathies, on our past. Liz, just talk to Sterling, he begged one night, cornering me in the kitchen. Explain it's just for a few more months, until after the baby is born. What can it hurt? The clause is ironclad. David, I said, not looking up from the London real estate listings I was perusing on my tablet. Asking for an exception would make me look weak, uncommitted. It would jeopardize the entire position. I worked too hard for this to risk it for people who have shown me nothing but disrespect. People? He shot back, his voice cracking. They're not people. They're my family. And you're my wife. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? I finally looked at him. It meant everything to me, until you decided that their comfort was more important than my peace. Until you made me a stranger in my own home. You redefined our marriage. David, Not me. He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, his eyes full of a bewildered hurt, as if he couldn't understand how the woman he married had become this monster. He never saw that his actions were the catalyst. Meanwhile, Chloe and Jake shifted tactics. The hysterics gave way to a sullen, passive-aggressive campaign. They stopped pretending to clean up after themselves entirely. The mess in the living area and kitchen became a deliberate protest. Jake would accidentally bump into my packed boxes in the hallway. Chloe would play sad music on her phone at all hours. It was juvenile, pathetic, and utterly ineffective. Their presence had become an irritating buzz in the background, a problem I had already solved. The final week, David became frantic. He tried to get Chloe and Jake to look at apartments, but the places he could afford on a teacher's salary were dismal compared to the brownstone, and they rejected them all with contempt. "We can't raise a baby in a dump like that," Jake scoffed after one viewing. "Where are we supposed to get the security deposit and first month's rent?" Chloe wailed. "You have to help us. David, you promised." I watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. They were trapped in the prison of their own entitlement, and David was finally realizing there was no lock on the door from the inside. The eviction day dawned bright and clear. I was already dressed in a sharp, traveling suit, my single suitcase by the front door. My car to the airport was scheduled to arrive in 2 hours, right on time, at 9 a.m. sharp. The doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the tense silence of the house. Chloe, who was now massively pregnant and had taken to camping on the living room sofa, let out a small whimper. Jake stood up, his posture aggressive. David looked like a man heading to his own execution. I walked to the door and opened it. There were 3 people standing on the stoop. A woman in a severe black pantsuit, holding a tablet, flanked by 2 large, impassive men in security uniforms. They looked like they'd been carved from stone. "Elizabeth Holloway?" the woman asked, her voice devoid of inflection. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Vance, from STV Corporate Property Management. We're here to take possession of the property." She handed me a clipboard. "If you could just sign here to confirm our arrival and the state of vacant possession." I took the clipboard and signed with a flourish. "The property is ready for transfer." Eleanor Vance gave a curt nod and stepped inside, her eyes sweeping over the scene with professional detachment. Her gaze fell on Chloe, Jake, and the pile of their unpacked belongings heaped in the corner of the living room. "Ma'am, sir," she said, her tone polite but utterly firm, "I need you to vacate the premises immediately." Jake took a belligerent step forward. "Who the hell are you? We're not going anywhere." Eleanor didn't even blink. She looked at Jake as if he were a mildly interesting insect. "My name is Eleanor Vance. This property is now under the management of Sterling Thorne Vanderbilt, per the contract signed by Ms. Holloway. All personal occupants must be removed prior to transfer. You are currently trespassing." "Trespassing?" Chloe shrieked from the couch. "I live here. I'm having a baby. Your personal circumstances are not relevant to the contract." Eleanor replied, her voice chillingly calm. She looked at her tablet. "You have 20 minutes to gather your personal belongings and leave. After that, we will be changing the locks, and any remaining property will be inventoried and placed in storage at your expense." "You can't do this," David cried, stepping between Eleanor and Chloe. "This is my house too. I'm her husband." Eleanor glanced at me, then back at her tablet. "The property deed and the signed management contract list only Elizabeth Holloway as the sole owner. Your marital status does not grant you tenancy rights that supersede a corporate contract. Sir, now, I strongly suggest you assist your guests in removing their things. My colleagues," she gestured to the 2 security guards, who took a synchronized step forward, "are here to ensure a smooth transition." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. This wasn't a family argument anymore. This was a corporate eviction. Cold, legal, and unstoppable. Chloe began to sob hysterically. Great. Gulping cries. Jake started yelling. A stream of profanities directed at me, at David, at the impassive guards. He made a sudden lunge toward one of the boxes containing my fragile items. It was over in a second. The two guards moved with practiced efficiency. One stepped in front of Jake, blocking his path, while the other took his arm in a firm but nonviolent grip. Sir, do not touch the property. Come with me. Please, the guard said, his voice a low rumble. Get your hands off me. Jake yelled, struggling uselessly. David stood frozen, his face a mask of horror and shame. He looked from the sobbing Chloe to the restrained Jake, to my cold, composed face. Elizabeth, for God's sake, stop this, he pleaded. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. It's done, David. The decision was made the moment you invited them in. You just didn't know it yet. I turned to Eleanor. I believe my work here is done. The keys. I handed her my set of house keys. She took them. Safe travels. Ms. Holloway, the car service is waiting. I picked up my suitcase and walked towards the door without a backward glance. The last thing I heard was Chloe's wail of despair, Jake's furious shouts fading as the guards began to escort him out, and David's broken voice trying to offer some futile comfort. I stepped out into the bright morning sun, the door closing firmly behind me, shutting out the chaos. The air had never smelled sweeter. I slid into the waiting town car, gave the driver the address for JFK, and leaned back against the leather seats. It was done. The house, the betrayal, the misery, all of it was in the past. London, and my future, awaited. London was a baptism by fire, and I emerged not just cleansed, but forged anew. The penthouse in Mayfair was a masterpiece of glass and steel, all sharp angles and breathtaking views of the Thames. It was the antithesis of the warm, lived-in brownstone, a deliberate, beautiful fortress. My new role was everything Arthur Sterling had promised and more. The challenges were immense, the politics cutthroat, but I thrived. I was respected, feared, and utterly in my element. The ghost of the woman who had been slowly suffocating in New York was laid to rest. In her place was a sharper, more focused version of Elizabeth Holloway. Months bled into a year. I settled into the rhythm of my new life. The work was all-consuming, and I let it be. It was easier than dwelling on the silence that waited for me in the pristine, empty apartment. The victory I had discovered could taste surprisingly hollow. I kept a private investigator on a modest retainer, not out of lingering affection, but out of a need for closure, a morbid curiosity to see the final act of the play I had written. The reports came in with bureaucratic regularity. David Holloway moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Teaching load increased, seen on several occasions with a woman, Sarah Jenkins, a fellow teacher. Relationship appears casual. Chloe Henderson gave birth to a boy named Liam, currently living with a child in a women's shelter in the Bronx. No contact with Jake Miller since approximately 2 weeks after the eviction. Jake Miller, arrested for petty theft, served 3 months, current whereabouts unknown. There was no sense of triumph reading them, just a cold, distant satisfaction. The pieces had fallen exactly as predicted. The parasitic relationship, built on sand, could not withstand the tide. David had found a simpler, less demanding companion. Chloe was alone, playing the victim on a grander, more tragic stage. Jake had simply vanished back into the chaos from whence he came. It was on a rainy London evening, the city lights smearing across my panoramic windows, that my personal phone buzzed. It was a New York number I didn't recognize, but a part of me knew. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. Elizabeth, it's David. Please, I need to talk to you, just for a few minutes. I stared at the message. A year of no contact. What could he possibly have to say? An apology? An excuse? A request for money? Curiosity? That old, treacherous serpent coiled in my stomach. I needed to hear it. I needed to hear the sound of his regret, to see the final proof of my vindication. I called the number back. It rang twice before he picked up. Elizabeth? His voice was hesitant, older. It lacked the defensive bluster I remembered. David, you have 5 minutes. A long sigh crackled down the line. Thanks. I just. God, I don't even know where to start. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I saw a picture of you in a Financial Times article about Sterling's European expansion. You looked incredible. I'm busy. David, get to the point. Right. Sorry. He took a shaky breath. I'm calling to say I'm sorry. A real apology. For everything. For inviting them in. For not listening to you. For making you feel like your home wasn't yours. I was wrong. So wrong. The words landed. But they didn't have the impact I'd imagined they would. They were just words, arriving a year too late. I know, I said, my voice flat. I thought I was being a good guy, but I was just a fool, a pushover. You were right about everything. They bled me dry and then left. Chloe called me from the shelter, screaming that it was my fault. Jake threatened me for money before he disappeared. It was all a lie, the whole thing. I remained silent, letting him fill the empty space with his confession. I lost you, he said, and his voice broke. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too stupid to see what was right in front of my face. Our marriage, our life. I threw it all away for people who didn't give a damn about me. There was a long silence, punctuated only by the sound of the London rain against the glass. He was waiting for me to absolve him, to offer some scrap of comfort. Is that all? I finally asked. Is that all? He repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. Elizabeth, don't you feel anything? What we had, it meant something. Didn't it? It did, I said, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something, not for him, but for the ghost of the man I thought he was. It meant everything, until you showed me it didn't. You made a choice, David, and I made one, too. Mine just had better legal counsel. He let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Yeah, I guess it did. He was quiet for a moment. So that's it? This is goodbye? There was no goodbye, David, I said, my voice softening with a finality that was almost gentle. There was an ending. You just weren't in the room when I wrote it. I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call and placed the phone on the cool glass table. I walked to the window, looking out at the illuminated city. The rain had eased, leaving the streets glistening. I had won. I had my victory, my empire, my peace. The look on their faces as they were escorted out was everything I had imagined. But the triumph was a quiet, solitary thing. The house, the marriage, the life I had built, it was all gone, dismantled by my own hand in response to his betrayal. I felt no hatred for him anymore, just a vast, echoing emptiness where that fire had once burned. He was a chapter in a book I had closed, a painful lesson learned. I turned away from the window, my reflection ghosting in the glass. The past was a country I had no intention of revisiting. I had a board meeting in the morning, a new acquisition to oversee, a life to live. It was done. The silence after hanging up on David was profound, but it was no longer the tense, suffocating silence of the brownstone. It was the clean, empty silence of a battlefield after the war. I had won. Every objective seized, every enemy routed. Yet, standing there in my immaculate, silent fortress, the champagne of victory had gone flat in the glass. My intercom buzzed, a sharp electronic intrusion. Ms. Holloway, your car is here for the dinner at the Savoy. My assistant's voice, crisp and efficient, was an anchor to the present. Thank you, Claudia. I'll be right down. The dinner was a networking event with potential investors from Berlin. I played my part flawlessly. I was Elizabeth Holloway, senior managing partner, sharp, persuasive, untouchable. I discussed market volatility and regulatory hurdles. My laughter at appropriate moments was like the chime of fine crystal, but a part of me was detached, observing the performance from a distance. The call had stirred the sediment. A week later, an email from Eleanor Vance popped up in my inbox with the subject line, "Update, New York property, final disposition. Ms. Holloway, per your authorization and the terms of the management contract, the New York brownstone has been cleared, professionally cleaned, and inspected. All personal effects remaining were cataloged and, as per your instruction, donated to charity, receipt attached." The property was listed on the luxury rental market and has secured a corporate tenant, a Japanese tech firm, on a 3-year lease. The first quarter's rent has been deposited into the designated account. Please find the full report and lease agreement attached. The matter is now concluded. Best, Eleanor. Concluded. The word was so final. I clicked open the attachment. There were photos. My former home. Stripped of every trace of me, of David, of them. It looked like a hotel suite, beautiful, sterile, and utterly anonymous. I felt nothing. No pang of loss. No flicker of nostalgia. It was just a financial asset now, performing well, as it should be. But David's call had opened a door I thought I'd welded shut. It wasn't regret that seeped through, but a cold, clinical curiosity. I needed the final page. I needed to see the epilogue. I called Claudia into my office. "I need a personal errand run," I said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. It had 2 names, Chloe Henderson, and the women's shelter address from the investigator's report. "Find this woman. Tell her Elizabeth Holloway is willing to cover 6 months of rent on a modest, clean apartment and provide a stipend for childcare. On one condition." Claudia, to her credit, didn't bat an eyelash. "And the condition, ma'am? She signs a non-disclosure agreement. She never speaks my name, David's name, or mentions the brownstone to anyone, ever again. She gets a fresh start, and I get permanent silence. Have our legal team draft something airtight. Use an intermediary service for the payments. No direct contact. Understood." Claudia took the note and left. It was a cheap price for a permanent solution. Chloe would get the lifeline she desperately needed, and I would sever the last, fraying thread connecting me to that chapter. It wasn't compassion, it was pest control. The call from Claudia came 2 days later. "It's done." She signed. She cried. "She called you a blessing. The first payment has been processed." Good. I ended the call. Chloe was now a closed file. A month later, a padded envelope arrived at my office, marked personal. Inside was a small, familiar jewelry box. My grandmother's pearls. I had forgotten about them in a safe deposit box. There was a note in David's clumsy handwriting. "Elizabeth, found these while closing out the storage unit. They always looked better on you than in a box. No strings. Just returning what's yours. D." I held the cool strands in my hands. It was the first gesture from him that had no angle, no plea, no hidden blame. It was simply in return, an acknowledgement. It was the period at the end of the sentence. That evening, I had drinks with Alistair Croft, a charming, ruthlessly ambitious hedge fund manager I'd been seeing casually. We were at a rooftop bar. The London skyline sprawled at our feet. "You're quiet tonight, Lizzie," Alistair said, swirling his scotch. "Trouble with the German consortium?" "No," I said, taking a sip of my martini. "No trouble, just tying up some old, loose ends." "Ah," he said, his eyes knowing. He was a man who understood the value of clean breaks, the best kind of ends. Burn the files and never look back. I smiled. A genuine one. Something like that. Later, back in my silent apartment, I placed the pearl necklace on the dresser. I didn't put them on. I didn't put them away. I just left them there. A small, white artifact from a sunken world. I opened my laptop. There was a new email from Arthur Sterling. Subject line: Singapore expansion. Your thoughts. The future. Vast and demanding. Was impatiently tapping its watch. I felt it then, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a settled, quiet certainty. The hollow feeling wasn't about loss. It was about space. David, Chloe, Jake, the brownstone. They had filled my life with noise and drama and betrayal. Now they were gone, and the silence they left behind was immense. It wasn't emptiness to be mourned. It was capacity, the old wound, the one carved by betrayal and salted with rage, had finally scarred over. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a piece of tough, resilient tissue, a reminder of a battle survived. I looked from the pearls on my dresser to the glowing screen of my laptop, from the closed past to the wide-open future. I closed the jewelry box with a soft, definitive click. Then I turned to my computer, opened the Singapore proposal, and began to type. My words were sharp, my analysis incisive, my vision clear. The chapter titled David was not just over, it was archived. Its lessons learned, its weight dismissed. The war was won, the peace was mine, and it was not hollow. It was simply, powerfully, quiet. It was done. I was done, and I was just beginning. The Singapore proposal was a monster, a complex web of regulatory hurdles and aggressive financial projections. I buried myself in it for weeks. The detailed work a welcome anesthetic. Alistair Croft proved a diverting, if somewhat predictable, companion. Our relationship was a transaction of intellect and mutual ambition, conducted over expensive meals and in sleek hotel rooms. It was uncomplicated. It was what I needed. A year bled into 2. My reputation in London was cemented. I was feared, respected, and, in certain circles, even admired. The article in the Financial Times had been the first of many. I cultivated the image of the unflappable, brilliant American, a force of nature in the staid world of British finance. The past was a ghost I assumed I had successfully laid to rest, which is why the email, when it arrived, felt like a physical blow. It was a Friday evening. I was working late. The city lights a glittering carpet below my office window. The sender's address was a generic freemail account, liamsmum.chloe@gmail.com. The subject line was blank, a cold, not tightened in my stomach. I hadn't heard that name in years. How did she get this address? My corporate email was fiercely guarded. Claudia must have given it to the intermediary during the apartment arrangement. A lapse in protocol. A mistake. I clicked it open. There was no greeting. Elizabeth. I know I signed that paper, but I don't know who else to turn to. It's about Liam. My son. He's sick. The doctors say it's serious. His kidneys. He needs treatments. Special ones. That aren't all covered. I've spent everything. I'm going to lose the apartment. I lost my job because I had to take so much time off. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for him. He's just a little boy. He's innocent in all this. Please, you have so much. You won't even notice, but it would save him. I'm his mother. What else can I do? Chloe. The message was a torrent of desperation, riddled with grammatical errors, but the core of it was a masterstroke. It wasn't a shakedown. Not exactly. It was an appeal to a higher authority, not my pity, but a calculated guess at a residual, twisted sense of responsibility. He's innocent in all this. The words were chosen to inflict maximum damage. I leaned back in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. Rage was my first response. White hot, incandescent rage. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall to crawl out of the woodwork, to violate a legal agreement, to try and guilt me after everything. I had given her a clean start. I had been more than fair. I started drafting a reply, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Chloe, you are in violation of a binding non-disclosure agreement. Any further communication will be met with immediate legal action. The matter is closed. I hovered my finger over the send button, but I didn't click. I saw the ghost of a little boy, a child I had never met, who bore no blame for the sins of his parents. He's sick. Damn it. I whispered to the empty office. This was a different kind of war, not one I could win with contracts and cold fury. This was a moral ambush. I could ignore it. I had every legal right to do so. I could have my lawyer send a cease and desist letter that would terrify her into silence. It would be the clean, efficient thing to do. But the victory would be ashes, because she was right about one thing. The child was innocent, and if something happened to him, and I had the means to prevent it, that would be a new ghost to haunt the spacious silence of my life. I deleted the angry draft. I needed a different weapon, not a scalpel, but a solution so comprehensive it would ensure this would never, ever happen again. I called Alistair. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a lively party in the background. Lizzie, missing me already? I need a name, I said, bypassing any pleasantries. The best, most discreet, private medical consultant in the city. Someone who can liaise with hospitals in New York, assess pediatric nephrology cases, and manage a fund. No questions asked. The background noise faded as he presumably moved to a quieter spot. That's a rather specific request. Trouble? An administrative issue. Can you get me a name or not? I can do better than that. I know a guy, former MI5, now runs a firm that handles sensitive health matters for wealthy families. Discreet as a vault. I'll text you his details. An hour later, I was on the phone with a man named Julian Croft, no relation to Alistair, whose voice was as calm and dry as a desert wind. I explained the situation in bare-bones terms. A child in New York, a serious medical condition, a biological mother who is unable to manage the finances or care. My objective is to ensure the child receives the best possible medical treatment without any direct or ongoing financial support passing to the mother. I want a firewall, an irrevocable trust, administered by a third party that pays the medical providers directly. I also want the mother assessed. If she is deemed unfit, I want options for the child's long-term welfare. Understood. Ms. Holloway, Julian said, we can arrange for a medical team to evaluate the boy, with the mother's consent. Of course, we can frame it as a charitable outreach from a pediatric foundation. The trust can be established in the Bahamas, utterly untouchable. As for the assessment of the mother, we are very thorough. Do it, I said. Spare no expense. But I am a ghost in this. Julian, my name is never to be mentioned. Absolutely. A week later, Julian called back. The evaluation is complete. The boy, Liam, has a rare congenital kidney condition. Serious, but treatable with a specific and expensive drug regimen and eventual transplant. The prognosis is good with consistent care. And the mother? I asked, my voice tight. Ms. Henderson is overwhelmed. She loves the child. That is evident, but she is financially unstable, emotionally fragile, and has a history of poor decision-making. Our psychologist believes she would struggle to manage the complexity of his long-term care. The cold, hard data was exactly what I needed. Set up the trust. Fund it sufficiently for his lifetime of medical needs, including the transplant. Hire a dedicated caseworker to liaise with the doctors and ensure he gets to his appointments. Takes his medication. The mother is to be kept on an information diet. She gets updates, not control. And if she balks, if she wants control of the funds, remind her of the alternative, which is nothing, and remind her of the NDA she has already broken. This is not a negotiation. This is the only offer on the table. It was done. A solution engineered with the cold precision of a corporate takeover. Liam would get his chance. Chloe would be taken care of, but kept at arm's length. And I would have purchased my peace of mind, not with a one-off payment that would be squandered, but with a bulletproof, perpetual system. A few days later, an email arrived from the free mail account. It was only 2 words long. Thank you. I didn't reply. I deleted it and blocked the address. Then I walked to my window, looking out at the timeless flow of the Thames. I had faced down the ghost of the past, not with a shout, but with a silent, devastatingly effective checkbook. I had not been blackmailed by sentiment. I had managed a liability. But as I stood there, a thought, unbidden, crept in. I had built a life that was a fortress, but fortresses are defined by what they keep out. I had kept out the chaos, the pain, the betrayal, but looking at the cold, beautiful geometry of my existence, I wondered if I had also walled out everything else. The war was over. The peace was secure. But as I turned back to the sterile glow of my laptop, the silence in my pristine apartment felt, for the very first time, like a choice I was no longer sure I wanted to make. The resolution of the Liam situation, as I coldly termed it in my mind, was a masterclass in strategic detachment. Julian Croft's firm executed the plan with flawless efficiency. The trust was established. A stern, capable caseworker was assigned to liaise with the doctors and ensure Chloe received only necessary, pre-approved updates. The firewall was impregnable. I had addressed the problem not as a human dilemma, but as a systemic risk, and I had neutralized it. The email of thanks was deleted, the address blocked. The matter was, once again, concluded, yet the incident left a hairline crack in the polished facade of my new life. It was a reminder that the past was not a country I had left behind, but a ghost that could, with the right provocation, still whisper at the feast. My work continued to be all-consuming. The Singapore expansion was approved, and I spent the next 6 months in a whirlwind of transcontinental flights, high-stakes meetings, and negotiations that stretched into the early hours. Alastair Croft was a convenient companion for galas and events, his charm a useful shield against the more tedious social obligations. Our relationship was a perfectly balanced equation of mutual benefit. He enjoyed the prestige of being seen with a woman of my stature. I appreciated his undemanding company and his extensive, useful network. It was companionship without complication, intimacy without vulnerability. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of negotiations had concluded successfully, we were at a private club, celebrating with a few key investors. The champagne was flowing. The conversation was loud and self-congratulatory. Alastair was holding court, telling a story that involved a golf game and a minor European royal. I smiled. I nodded. I played my part. But as I looked around the room, at the faces flushed with victory and expensive alcohol, I felt a profound and unsettling disconnect. The triumph felt hollow. The laughter sounded tinny. I was the architect of this success, yet I felt like a guest at a party thrown in my own honor. Alastair slid an arm around my waist, his breath warm against my ear. Another triumph. Lizzie, you were magnificent in there. They never knew what hit them. Thank you, Alastair, I said, my smile not quite reaching my eyes. You're quiet tonight. Everything all right? Just tired, I replied. The standard, acceptable excuse. Of course you are. Let's get out of here. I have a bottle of 82 Lafite waiting at my place. A proper celebration. The offer was typical, an expensive seduction, and for the first time, the thought of it, the predictable conversation, the impersonal luxury of his apartment, the entire well-rehearsed ritual, filled me with a deep, unshakable weariness. Not tonight, Alastair, I said, gently extracting myself from his arm. I think I need to be alone. His face fell, just for a second, before the polished mask slipped back into place. Of course, you've earned a rest. Call me tomorrow. I left the club. The cool night air a shock to my system. I instructed my driver to take me home, not to the apartment, but to my apartment, the fortress. Once inside, I poured a glass of whiskey, a single malt. Neat, No ceremony, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window. The city shimmered, a vast circuit board of light and ambition. I had everything I had fought for: power, prestige, financial security so absolute it was boring. I had taken a sledgehammer to the messy, painful life I had in New York and built this sleek, impeccable replacement, and I was lonelier than I had ever been. The silence I had fought so hard to win was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. It was the silence of an empty museum, beautiful and dead. My phone buzzed on the glass table. It was a calendar reminder for the following week. Annual Shareholders Gala, Sterling, Thorne Vanderbilt, keynote speaker, E. Holloway, another performance, another speech to write, another room to win over. The thought was suffocating. I thought of David's final, simple gesture, the returned pearls. There had been no ask, no plea, just an acknowledgement of a shared history. I thought of Chloe's desperate, clumsy email. It was manipulative, yes, but it was also human. It was raw, messy, and real. Everything my life now was not. I had spent years building walls to keep the chaos out, but I had built them so high and so thick that I had walled myself into a gilded prison. The incident with Liam had been a flicker of something from the other side, a reminder of connection, however fraught and unwanted. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I found the number for the head of Sterling's philanthropic foundation. It was 11 p.m., but I knew Charles Edgerton would answer. He was as much of a workaholic as I was. Elizabeth? He answered, sounding surprised. Is everything all right? Charles, I need a project, I said, my voice firm, decisive. A project? I thought you had your hands full with Singapore. Not a corporate project, a personal one. For the foundation, I want to establish a new initiative, focused on pediatric renal diseases, specifically providing support for single mothers navigating complex medical treatments for their children, funding for medical bills, but also for housing, transport, psychological support, a holistic approach. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Elizabeth, that's incredibly specific and generous. Can I ask what's prompted this? You can ask, I said coolly, but I won't be providing a donor statement. I'll be funding the majority of it anonymously. I want you to handle the publicity, the administration. I'll provide the capital and the strategic direction. Another pause. I could almost hear his mind whirring, calculating the PR benefits, the tax implications. Of course, absolutely. We can set it up as a dedicated fund. The Holloway Pediatric Renal Support Fund has a nice ring to it. No, I said, the word sharp and final. No name. It's not about that. Call it the Lifeline Fund. Something simple. Something that doesn't have my name on it. Understood, Charles said, his tone now purely professional. I'll draw up some proposals first thing in the morning. I ended the call. I hadn't done it for Chloe. I hadn't even done it for Liam. Not really. I had done it for me. It was a way to engage with the world, with its pain and its complexity, on my own terms, not as a victim, not as a target for emotional blackmail, but as an architect. I could use my power, my resources, not just to build corporate empires, but to build something that might, in some small way, mend a broken thing. It was a calculated risk, an open window in the fortress wall. But as I stood there, looking out at the endless lights of London, the silence in the room felt different. It was no longer empty. It was full of potential. The war was over. The peace was secure. But perhaps peace wasn't a destination. Perhaps it was a verb, and I was just beginning to learn how to do it. The establishment of the Lifeline Fund was, like all my endeavors, executed with ruthless efficiency. I transferred a significant, yet manageable, portion of my assets into the foundation's control, with strict, detailed protocols on its disbursement. Charles Edgerton, to his credit, asked no further questions. The allure of a massive, no strings attached donation outweighed any curiosity. The fund was launched with quiet fanfare within the philanthropic community, a new, anonymous initiative dedicated to supporting families navigating pediatric renal disease. I took a seat on the Foundation's Oversight Committee under my own name. It was a strategic move. My presence lent credibility and ensured my anonymous directives were followed to the letter. The first meeting was a revelation. Around the polished table were doctors, social workers, and other philanthropists. The conversation wasn't about market share or quarterly earnings. It was about medication adherence, the emotional strain on siblings, the logistical nightmare of getting a child to dialysis 3 times a week. I listened, mostly. I was far out of my depth in terms of the medical and social jargon, but I understood systems, logistics, and inefficiencies. When a frustrated doctor described how a brilliant treatment plan failed because a single mother had to choose between a paying shift and taking her son to an appointment, I saw a problem I could solve. We need to decouple the support from the parent's employment status. I interjected, my voice cutting through the warm, well-meaning discussion. The fund shouldn't just cover medical bills. It should provide a transportation stipend, a flexible childcare grant for siblings. Treat the family as a holistic unit. The financial burden is the root cause of the failure to adhere. There was a moment of silence. Then, the lead doctor, a woman named Anya Sharma with kind eyes and a sharp mind, nodded slowly. She's right. We're treating the symptoms, not the disease. The disease is poverty. In that room, I wasn't Elizabeth Holloway, the feared corporate raider. I was Elizabeth Holloway, the committee member with a knack for operational efficiency. It was refreshing. A few weeks later, I ended things with Alistair. It was a conversation as clinical as a contract termination. This isn't working for me anymore. Alistair, I said over a final dinner at a restaurant he had chosen, a place that was all about being seen. He looked genuinely surprised, then amused. Found someone else. Lizzie? Someone with a more impressive portfolio? No, I said, sipping my wine. I've just found that I prefer my own company. This has been pleasant, but it's run its course. He studied me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. Beneath the irritation, you're a cold one. Holloway, I'll give you that. No messy feelings. I can appreciate that. He raised his glass. To clean breaks. To clean breaks. I echoed. It was the most honest moment we'd ever shared. Free from the performative aspect of that relationship. I leaned into my new, strange double life. By day, I was the ruthless head of European operations, dismantling underperforming divisions and negotiating billion-dollar mergers. By night, and on weekends, I was the anonymous benefactor and committee member, reviewing grant applications for the Lifeline Fund. It was through the fund that I met Michael Faraday. He was a partner at a rival firm, a legend in green technology investments. We had crossed paths professionally for years, always as respectful adversaries. He was the only one who had ever beaten me in a major takeover battle, a fact I grudgingly admired. I ran into him at a charity auction benefiting a children's hospital. He was there with his teenage daughter, who was clearly the center of his universe. Holloway, he said, a genuine smile on his face. I hear you're the driving force behind Sterling's new philanthropic push, the Lifeline Fund. Impressive work. It's a worthwhile cause. I said, my standard, deflecting response. I know, he said, his gaze direct and unsettlingly perceptive. My sister's boy has cystic fibrosis. I've seen firsthand how the system can fail families. It's good to see someone with your talents applying them to something like this. It wasn't flattery. It was an acknowledgement. We talked for 20 minutes, not about deals or markets, but about the bureaucratic hurdles of healthcare, the importance of funding psychosocial support. He was sharp, witty, and there was a warmth to him that was entirely absent from men like Alistair. He was also, I noted with a clinical detachment that felt increasingly forced, very attractive. A week later, a proposal arrived at my office, not a corporate one, a proposal for a joint venture between our two firms' charitable foundations to create a larger, more comprehensive support network for families with chronically ill children. It was a brilliant piece of work, strategically sound and genuinely impactful. I found myself spending hours on the phone with him, debating the minutiae of the proposal. The conversations would start professionally, but would often drift into personal territory. He asked me questions no one had asked in years, not about my success, but about what drove me. He spoke about his daughter, about the balance of single parenthood and a demanding career. He was open in a way that felt dangerous. These conversations are the highlight of my week. Elizabeth, he said during one call, his voice warm, and I don't think it's just because of your brilliant mind for grant distribution. I felt a jolt, a flicker of the old panic, the instinct to retreat behind my walls. Michael, I'm not good at this. The personal aspect. There was a gentle laugh. I know. I've read the papers. The Ice Queen of Mayfair. But the woman I'm talking to? She's thawing around the edges. I was silent, my heart pounding. He was too close. He saw too much. Have dinner with me, he said, his tone softening. Not a business dinner. A dinner. Just two people. No agendas. The old Elizabeth would have refused. The old Elizabeth would have seen it as a vulnerability, an unnecessary complication. But the woman who had started a fund for a nephew she would never meet, the woman who was tired of the silence in her fortress, heard herself say, "All right, dinner." As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I was no longer just managing the architecture of my life. I was considering a new blueprint, one that included a door, and the prospect was more terrifying and more thrilling than any corporate takeover I had ever faced. The battle for my career was won. The journey toward a life, a real one, had perhaps just begun. The restaurant was a small, unassuming Italian place in a quiet corner of Covent Garden, a world away from the Michelin-starred temples where I usually conducted my business dinners. There were no white tablecloths, just checkered ones, and the air smelled powerfully of garlic and baking bread. I arrived first, a habit born of a lifetime of needing to control the terrain. I felt absurdly nervous, my palms slightly damp. It was an unfamiliar, almost adolescent sensation. When Michael walked in, he didn't look like a corporate titan. He was wearing a simple sweater and looked slightly windswept, as if he'd walked. He smiled when he saw me, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You found it," he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. I was half convinced my directions were terrible. "Google Maps is remarkably efficient," I replied, my tone drier than I intended. He laughed, a rich, easy sound. "Right. Of course." The dinner was not what I expected. We didn't talk about work. Not really. We talked about books. He was a voracious reader of history, a passion I shared but had let languish. We debated the fall of the Roman Empire with an intensity one usually reserved for boardroom battles. We talked about art, about the frustrating incompetence of the British Postal Service, about a documentary on deep-sea creatures he'd seen with his daughter. It was effortless, and it was terrifying. He asked me about myself, not my resume, but me. What did you want to be when you were a little girl? Before the power suits and the corner offices? The question was so disarming I almost answered truthfully. A librarian, I said, the memory surfacing from a deep, forgotten place. I liked the idea of all that quiet order. He smiled. I can see that. The order part, for sure. The quiet? I'm not so convinced. Over tiramisu. The conversation turned more serious. "That was quite a thing you did," he said. "With the fund. It's more than just a tax write-off for you. Isn't it? I put down my fork. I could have deflected, given a corporate answer, but I found I didn't want to. It started as a solution to a problem, a way to build a firewall, but it's become something else. He listened, truly listened, as I spoke, more than I had to anyone in a decade. I didn't mention names, but I told him about the ghost of a past betrayal, about a child who was an innocent casualty, about my desire to use the tools I had, money, strategy, control to fix a broken thing, even from a distance. I built my life into a fortress. Michael, I said finally, looking at my wine glass instead of at him, and I discovered that while it's very safe inside a fortress, it's also incredibly lonely. He was quiet for a moment. The strongest fortresses have gates, Elizabeth, and drawbridges. They're not meant to keep the world out forever, just to give you a safe place to decide who you let in. The simplicity of it, the profound truth of it, struck me silent. That dinner was the first of many. We became a couple in a way that felt entirely new. It was not a merger of empires. Like with Alistair, it was a partnership. He was not intimidated by my success. He was proud of it. He challenged me, called me out when I was being cold or dismissive. He dragged me to muddy country parks with his daughter, Sophie, a sharp, funny teenager who eyed me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. I was terrible at it all, the casual picnics, the small talk, the messiness of family life. But I was trying. A year later, I stood with Michael on the balcony of our apartment. We had kept our own places, but spent most of our time together here. The fortress had a permanent, welcome guest. The silence was now filled with the easy quiet of companionship, with the sound of Sophie's music drifting from her room, with the simple, profound noise of a life being lived. The past was not forgotten. I thought of David sometimes. I heard through the grapevine that he had married the teacher, Sarah, and was living a quiet, contented life in the suburbs. I felt a distant sense of peace for him. He had found his simplicity. Chloe and Liam, according to Julian's annual report, were stable. Liam was responding well to treatment. The Lifeline Fund was thriving, helping hundreds of families. The ghost was laid to rest, not by exorcism, but by integration. It was a part of my history, a stone in my foundation, but it no longer dictated the architecture of my present. Penny for your thoughts? Michael asked, slipping an arm around my waist. I was just thinking, I said, leaning into him. I spent so long building walls. I never learned how to build a home. He kissed the top of my head. You're doing just fine. It's a bit unorthodox, but it's strong, and it's got a hell of a view. I looked out at the London skyline, no longer a circuit board of rival ambitions, but a tapestry of a million lives, a million stories. My story had been one of battle, of victory, of isolation. The victory had been empty until I learned that the ultimate power wasn't in defending what you had, but in having something worth sharing. The war was over. The peace I had won so fiercely was no longer just an absence of conflict. It was a presence. It was the warmth of a hand in mine, the sound of laughter in the next room, the courage to have a past without being its prisoner. I had started with a blueprint for revenge. I had ended by designing a life, and as I turned from the view to the man beside me, I knew the final, most important signature on the contract of my happiness had just been written, not in ink, but in the simple, steadfast promise of a shared tomorrow.